Our second item on the agenda today under presentation is the PVSC, the Property Valuation Services Corporation, with a presentation on the CAP program 10 years into the process. We're very pleased to welcome the CEO of the PVSC and the spokesperson, Kathy Gillis, who has colleagues with her. So Kathy, welcome. The podium's yours, and I'll leave the other introductions to you.
Great. Thank you very
much.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Is it? Okay, great. I have here tonight with me a couple of folks that I do want to introduce. We have Dave Penny. He's from our office. Dave. We have Ken McKinnon. We have Nancy LeBlanc Arsenal. So those are our assessors. And here as well, I have Russ Adams and Meredith Buchanan. So I just wanted to thank the Mayor and Council for this opportunity to go through our presentation. We have sent a previous presentation that was basically around the assessment role and the results of the assessment role. And we're happy to entertain questions on that, but the presentation I'm going to be going through tonight is specifically around the CAP. So we're well aware that CBRM has been reviewing and analyzing the impact of the CAP, and we know that councillors have been visiting communities and they've been engaged with property owners in terms of the budget process and received a lot of questions around the CAP. So we're here tonight to hopefully bring some clarification to that, answer your questions, and explain a little bit about what we understand the CAP process to be and some thoughts around a modernization of the CAP. So what I just want to point to, and I know the councillors have had the presentation before tonight, but there has been a big difference in the last 10 years, and the CAP was introduced back in 2005. And this was then, in 2005, you had assessment hikes that were very, very high. You had questions about assessments putting property owners out of their property in oceanfront. And then the province was looking for an answer of what to do with these big increases. Now what we see with our market is that it's basically flat. There are some areas that are going up, but we do not see the increases we would have had 10 years ago. In fact, the assessment is about half of what it was for last year in terms of an increase, and about a 1.5% increase overall. So when you look at what it was 10 years ago and what that market value is now, very, very substantial differences. We were seeing in some cases 500% increases on some of the oceanfront property. We are not seeing that now. Also, back then, the CAP was introduced to deal with sudden and dramatic increases because the concern was that people were going to be taxed out of their homes. So the intention back then was to look after a problem related to that particular issue or perceived issue. And now, what we've got is people looking at the whole CAP program and wondering about whether or not it still makes sense. So you look at what the CFO, the previous CFO for HRM was talking about in terms of first-time property owners. Staff here as well too, looking into and analyzing the impact of the CAP and what it's meant for the municipality in addition to property owners. And then as well the UNSM taking a very aggressive position with regard to time to look at it. So basically what we're here tonight to talk about is what can that look like and why maybe this is the appropriate time to look at a change. Before we do that, though, I think it's really important to understand, if you go back to that slide with respect to the sudden and dramatic increases, the intention was to deal with that. But the way the CAP program is constructed, there's a number of unintended consequences we have. I'm just going to run through a couple of scenarios with you. But if you take a property in CBRM, which is assessed about $85,000, it has a capped assessment of $50,000, so that means there's a $34,000 reduction. If you had taxes with a cap, it would be about $1,000. Taxes without a cap, about $1,300. So there's a $347 difference. This is based on removing the cap, taking out the cap adjustments, creating a new tax rate. So this would have had a large cap reduction, this property, and over the years would have had an amount less than what they would normally have to pay. Here's one with a smaller, what we call a smaller cap reduction. So you see the assessed value is $85,000 and the cap value is $76,000, so a difference about $8,000. Taxes with the cap, so this is under the current regime, would be about $1,500. If we removed the cap, our calculation is that property tax would be reduced. So you're actually seeing a reduction of 175. And then the third one is a property without a cap. So there's properties that go in and out of the cap program for whatever reason. It could be a new homeowner that purchased the property. And taxes with the cap is about $1,694, and taxes without a cap, $1,356. So as you can see, as you start moving the assessments out of the cap program, recalculating that tax rate, there are going to be some that we'll see, according to our calculation, and we've done it over a period of time. Some are going to pay a little bit more, some are going to pay a little bit less. But what happens is you get fairness in the distribution of the tax burden. I'm going to skip over the Chester. It basically speaks to the same unintended consequence. And why this is important in terms of that fairness is, according to the Assessment Act, what we have to do as an assessment organization is produce market value. That's legislated. There's no exception to that. But the reason why market value is put in place is to ensure a fair distribution of the tax burden. So when you look at the second section of Section 42 of the Assessment Act, it says, so as to ensure that taxation falls in a uniform manner. Subject to Section 45A, Section 45A actually refers to the CAP program. So by introducing the CAP program, you actually have not met the standard in terms of fairness in the distribution. And that's really what this all is about, in terms of who pays more, who pays less, and to try to even that out so everybody pays their fair share. Back when it was first introduced in 2005, because it was intended for those big increases, there was only 25,000 properties in the program, and you had to apply to get into the program. And that was, you had to have a 15% increase. Now, over the last 10 years, things have changed so dramatically that there's 350,000 properties that are in the program. It's based on CPI, which for us is very flat, 0.3%. So anybody with that amount of increase actually gets capped. So if you look at then and now in terms of the intention, and go back to that original objective of to ensure that nobody was paying more over a certain amount, it's now everybody is in the cap program. And you have to wonder who's paying what, who's winning and who's losing in here. So the big question is why? Why now? 10 years later, why should we be doing something? Our argument is that it's time. There are so many changes that have gone on. If you look at the market assessments, if you look at our economy, if you look at our demographics, it's a very, very different time than it was 10 years ago. I talked to those unintended consequences in terms of those higher value properties paying less than the distribution of what they should be paying. What's happened is now you have neighborhoods, you have the same house, huge tax bill difference. You have higher value property owners benefiting and lower value property owners subsidizing. The money has to come from somewhere. The tax base doesn't change. The distribution of the tax base changes. First-time owners, people who want to upgrade, people who want to downsize, new Nova Scotians, strong words in here in terms of victimize, but again, if you look at the original reasoning behind it, it was not to say first-time homeowners are going to have to pay on market value and everybody else pays on a capped assessment. People who improve their property, because the portion of your property that's renovated goes out of the cap calculation. So you don't get capped if you put an addition on your home or if you renovate substantially within your property. That has to go into the market value side of the equation. There's been some challenge from the business community that that distribution goes over to them because you still have to collect the same amount of taxes. So the question is it fair to the business community? And then because apartment buildings aren't capped, the concern is that if they were capped, you would increase the tax component in those properties. So what we've come up with, and if my time is running out, please somebody nod at me, but there is an approach that we've decided that may make sense for folks around reforming the program, and it's basically guided by 4 main principles. One is it has to be really simple to understand. The CAP program is a very complicated program in a lot of ways. What we're suggesting here is we make it very simple. And the simplest way to do that is to graduate the program so that people who are in the program now will eventually move out of the program over a long period of time, so you're not getting that shock value. The calculations that we have on this are in your presentation. I don't need to go through them, but you can see we've recalibrated to take people out of the program. And we want to do it in a way that wouldn't create such a burden for property owners. And that's when you create the fairness in the tax system. But in order to get that fairness, there has to be concession. There has to be compromise. The compromise would be that those that have been paying less than what they should be paying over the last number of years would start to pay a little bit more. But new property owners, we're saying everybody stays in the CAP program, because the minute you go out of the program, you have to start all over again in terms of being calculated for your taxes that you owe. We're saying do it over a longer term, take the time, really think this through, make sure that our numbers match up. We've talked to staff here at CBRM in terms of recalculating every property tax so you know exactly what can happen. We've done that kind of analysis in our organization as well, not to the degree, but we know over a 10-year period what these properties would look like. And then the big one, and what wasn't in the original legislation that may have helped this a little bit more, was what we call transparency in taxation. So you actually see what your tax bill would look like, as I showed you before, with or without the cap. And that would require municipalities to show or expose their tax rates somehow so the property owner could see it. In the city of Calgary, they actually put it on their assessment notice. So you see if I was paying based on this, assessed value if I was paying on this. So it's called truth in taxation. And back when the cap was introduced, unfortunately, some of the municipalities that were seeing these really high increases didn't adjust their tax rate. So that's where you see people getting concerned about an increase in assessment automatically means an increase in taxes. So what do? We'll lower the assessment. But the unfortunate thing with that is it messed up the distribution of the tax burden. So I won't go through because council has seen these. And it's just to say, how would you recalibrate it? We're saying over a 10-year period. Now, that's subject to what the municipalities think is appropriate. It may be 5 years, it may be 7. It has to be based on your needs. The way we did it was we looked at what the revenues would be required, added in a cost of living amount, and came up with a new tax rate. But that's all subject to how you want to approach it. And why now? We think now because you see the flattening of the market. It makes sense. Caps are no longer really required. It very much aligns with what the province is talking about in terms of the One Nova Scotia report, keeping young people in Nova Scotia, having their houses, they can keep their houses, bringing in immigrants so they can buy homes in Nova Scotia. Very much fits with the whole economic side of things. We're the only province outside of PEI that has a cap on its assessment. New Brunswick had one. They removed it. But what they instituted instead was a spike management. So where those assessments go up over a certain percentage or a certain threshold, you would actually institute a spike. And that means the assessment would stay at that level, and as soon as the market adjusted or recalibrated, then you graduate those people out. It would be a temporary measure. And it worked in New Brunswick. And we think the right leadership, the right time. Obviously, it's really important that all councils understand it, that the province understands it, that the UNSM understands it. But we think those factors are in place now more than ever. So our approach is evolution, not revolution. You just can't take this and go with it too quickly because people will react and people won't understand it. And a lot of the problem right now is people really don't understand how the program works. So we respect that it's a very political, very sensitive issue, a very public issue. So we're saying gradually, but very transparently explain how you're going to make the change. Now, we're just the service delivery people. We have the legislation. We're required to do the cap, but we have a fair amount of knowledge. We have a fair amount of understanding of how it works. We're very much offering that service to CBRM or the UNSM or any other municipality to really dig deep and try to understand it and see what can happen. Leadership working together, and I referenced all the partners who need to be at the table. And I think the biggest piece is to do that consultation and make sure the public understands and doesn't see it as a loss, but it really is a recalibration and bringing fairness back into the system.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Kathy, for the presentation. As you say, it is a very complex matter that people try to get their heads around and understand, but also it has an effect on everyone's ultimate tax bill. At this time, I would recognize Councillor Sacre.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Kathy, for the presentation, and thank your colleagues for coming to visit us. And make sure you spend lots of money while you're here. Not on your expense, of course. For me, Mr. Mayor, it's something that we've been dealing with for a number of years now, and without getting into a whole lot of detail of it, my concern is the process when it first started. What it was intended for was, as Kathy alluded to earlier, is to help the homeowner with respect to their tax bills. The issue for me is now, I think what's important to note is that this is not a municipal council decision to either implement or take away when it comes to this provincial program. What we need to make sure is that we act on behalf of our residents that put us here to make sure there's a fair process in place. And I wonder, Mr. Mayor, if I could, I'd like to introduce a motion and it touches on the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities and the Association of Municipal Administrators have already been in discussion with the provincial government and provincial government before them to sit down at the table and discuss this very issue. That this council endorse an all-party committee to review this process with the two organizations that represent all the municipalities in this province and bring back a report or at least a recommendation that municipalities can review and possibly digest.
Okay, just the motion is by Councillor Sacre that Council vote on the the recommendation of an all-party committee of the legislature to review the CAP process and program. Correct?
That's correct.
Yep. And that's seconded by Councillor MacLeod. On the motion, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, I do. And it's been brought up in previous years, and I'll even go to municipal election in the past when people are knocking on doors and councillors are campaigning because we discussed it around the table. There's candidates out there that play on people's emotions and the issues with regard to their economic situation, that if you vote for him, they're going to take that cap off and you're going to get less, you're going to be paying more money and all that sort of stuff. This is not about our council. This is representing the taxpayer out there in a fair, equitable manner. And I think that's important to note. So with that, I'll give way to my council colleagues here to ask and clarify any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sacre. Councillor Doncaster on the motion?
I will speak on the motion. Okay. I'm not supporting the motion until we do something about our own tax structure. Until we get a change in our tax structure, I'm not supporting anything on this cap until that's straightened out. Thank you.
Councillor Eldon MacDonald.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Kathy, for coming in. I will, if I could, ask, though, maybe to back up, whether we want to do it now or at the end of the questioning, in regards to the slides, and actually speaking to the calibration slide. specifically because I think it's important that the residents, and we are live streamed and on TV, and I think it's important that those particular numbers and the examples that are given there are presented to the public so they have a better understanding of what the recalibration would do.
Yep.
It's a very difficult topic to discuss. As Councillor Sacre says, it's more of a provincial issue than it is a municipal issue. And I received a call a couple of weeks ago myself from a resident who was quite concerned that we were going to be removing the cap, and I indicated to her that it was not our responsibility, nor do we have any authority to do that. But it is a system that is not working properly. It needs to be looked at, and recalibration will prove that. We have young families that contact me, and in particular people that are selling homes and wanting to downsize. And they're having trouble selling their homes to downsize because someone's going to get a tax bill that's going to be twice as much as it was the day before. So they're selling a home with, their taxes are $3,000. Someone buys that home the next day, the taxes go to $6,200, $6,300. When the purchaser sees that, they say, well, we can't afford $6,000. We thought it was $3,000. Well, we can't buy that house, so the homeowner struggles to sell. New development, the same thing, building new homes. Our economy is stagnant with building new homes for that very reason. You find an empty lot, build an identical home to the person that lives in the lot next to you, and you are charged over twice the amount of your next door neighbor, and you live in the identical home. That is not a fair system. It needs to be fair, as you said, that all taxpayers are paying their fair share, but we need to sit down, and I will support the motion. I think it's important that an all-party committee be struck and look at this issue, and in particular, as Councillor Sacre says, work with the two bodies, the UNSM and the Municipal Administrators Association to move this forward so that we can find a system that is fair to those that are currently being punished by the current system. So, but if you could do the recalibration slide, I'd greatly appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elder MacDonald. Recognize Councillor Flynn on the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, thank you, Kathy. Great presentation. I agree with Councillor MacDonald, but on the other end of the spectrum, we also hear a lot from pensioners, seniors that are out there, and they're worried that without the cap, that they're not going to be able to afford to stay in their home. Now, that's the biggest question I get. And like you said, with Councillor MacDonald stating also, we have young families that can't afford to buy a home because they can't afford the tax. So we have both ends of the spectrum here, so it'd be great to see something, a formula that's going to help out both. And I will be supporting Councillor Sacre also. And thank you again.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Perouche.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much, Kathy, for the presentation. It opens some doors and windows for me, but I think you're speaking to the converters, as Councillor Sacre mentioned. It's not our baby. It's not our solution. It's our problem. You're telling us and you're showing us we already know that. Now, one of the slides and the references that you made, the right leadership, the right time. Well, the right leadership is not here. The right leadership, I don't think, is in Halifax either. But you have stated to us that pretty well you're the messenger. You're doing your job, and you're doing a fine job. And you did an excellent job at presenting to us tonight. But you should be making this presentation to the minister and to the whole cabinet. You should be reaching out to the premier. Now, the people out there, when looking at one of your slides, why review and improve the cap? And who's losing and who's winning? Some of the items, punishing those who improve their homes. Who would want to do that? To anybody. The provincial government wants to do that. And they are doing that by their actions on the cap. It's their cap. They put it in there. I can say, and we're talking to the converted here in the room, we had a presentation the other day on pre-budgets, and we could lower the taxes for the very people we serve in the CBRM by upwards of 20% without a cap. We didn't put it in here, and we can't get it out. We want to help our people. Get rid of the cap, and we can drop your taxes by 20%. That's not punishing the people. That's serving the people we should be serving. The province of Nova Scotia are serving themselves. They're not serving the people. And in your presentation, who is being affected adversely by the cap? The people at the top are winning, and the people least afford to lose are losing more. Now, really, there's been people locked up for less. Seriously. And then we had the Canadian, I read in the paper, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business People in here advocating a downsizing and lowering of commercial taxes for the business community. And in your presentation, the tax burden concerns from the business community. They're already getting beaten up, and now they're getting beaten up some more. And this is not an accident. This is not an accident. This is by choice. This is by design. But what I would really hope, you traveling all over the province to go to every one of the municipalities, if that's your plan, I don't know if it is or not, but every single municipality, by virtue of the UNSM and the Association of Municipal Administrators, they already know this. Every municipality knows they're getting hammered by this cap. I would say you've got to find a way to get into that cabinet in Halifax, and you have to impress upon the conscientious people in there that to better serve the people that we serve and they serve, the best way to do that is to get rid of this thing. This is the elephant and the four-headed monster that's in the room. And it's filling their coffers with money, but at what expense, at what cost? And I don't know how they can sleep. I don't know how they can go to sleep at night knowing this. This is not a secret. Marie Walsh has got a presentation that she gave to a previous council. And I mean, when you go down and you look at that presentation and you listen, I mean, it's not a highly sophisticated, it's just like you're saying. Lots of transparency in it and something that everybody can understand. And the public out there, when Councillor Flynn says about these pensioners, if they could hear and see that, they would understand. But the plan was devised not to be transparent, to be complicated. That's why, and it's successful. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you,
Mayor.
Councillor Proust. Recognize Councillor Prince.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the CBRM chambers. You undoubtedly faced many audiences recently and in the past, and no doubt this presentation will garner media attention because we've heard a lot of us, so many of the presentations on the cap. I believe that we as municipal leaders recognize what you're actually telling municipalities. As you indicated, it's 10 years since the cap was introduced, and since we no longer have significant assessment spikes, it appears that the cap, as you also stated, we're having unintended circumstances. You know, the cap can certainly save some people money, but for every dollar someone saves, somebody else is paying more than they should. And it's being said in the case in a number of municipal units, the tax rate would decline if the cap was removed. And it's been said by almost every councillor who spoke on this. It was introduced by the province, voted on in the House of Legislators, and supported by all parties. So if there's going to be a move to take it off, it certainly would have to go to them. And as the motion stated, that they want the Premier has apparently been receptive of an all-party committee. And if he can get the support of the other two parties to at least talk about the possible ratifications of the cap, I think the result, we would certainly be interested in knowing the results of those findings. We're not in a position to remove the cap, but we are in a position to tell the public about the cap, the effect it's having on the municipalities. But I tell you, you know, I know you do a really good job in all the presentations I've heard you make, but I tell you the one pressing problem that all municipalities face, the problem about telling it like it is that no one can effectively sell it to the public. And if you're saving that $100, somebody's saying you're not taking it off me type of deal. So your presentation also says that you're not going to lose your home. You could possibly look at some low-income programs. You can look at tax deferrals, or you can phase it in over 7 to 10 years. And that's what, if we're going to get a buy-in from the public, they have to, I guess, believe what you're trying to say. And we have to, if we ever get into where we can show it, we will have to make sure that it's not a tax grab that we're looking for. We're just trying to be fair to the citizens that we represent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Prince. I'd recognize Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Kathy, and your colleagues for attending and bringing to light the issue that has been a major concern for all councils across Nova Scotia. You know, while we may not be, yes, you are talking to the converted. Back 6 years ago, we had a demonstration in Halifax that was overwhelmingly attended by councillors and aldermen and whatever. And apparently it fell on deaf ears. There was a march of concern about the MOU that was in place, and yet previous government had seen a loophole and they jumped through it. Unfortunately, it was to benefit a few, but not all. You know, and I agree with Councillor Perusia, this would be a tax saving, because when you get the monies that you're entitled to, then the taxes would reflect on the way down. I don't care what anybody says, that's the way we have to, while we're not in a position to remove cap, we are certainly in a position to express our opinions, and this has been, that's what's happening here. We have been expressing our opinions, that it is not fair to all people. And when you're not fair to all, then, you know, then because we are not the solution. The province is the problem. They won't deal with it. And I totally agree with Councillor Sacre going to an all-party committee and bringing forward something that they have to take a stand, because they've taken a stand against, in my opinion, all the taxpayers in the province of Nova Scotia, with the exceptions of I think it was 3,500 in the beginning. And I think that we have to recognize that we all deserve the same rights as everybody else has. We all pay for the same services. And if you're no matter if you're living in a $500,000 home or if you're living in a $50,000 home, you're still paying for the services. And thank you for coming and bringing and exposing and bringing it forward to the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. Recognize Councillor Eldon MacDonald and then Councillor Sacre. Councillor Eldon MacDonald.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. Just very briefly, I could have brought this up my first time around, but I think it's important that we actually hear from our CFO, Marie Walsh, in regards to the numbers and how the cap affects our municipality. And Councillor Prush had alluded to why I pressed for a second time to speak, and Marie can speak to this. It's 19.6, I believe, % in a reduction. So when Councillor Flynn mentions those citizens that are living in low-income housing and have homes that are at a lower assessment as opposed to homes that are very highly assessed or very high assessments, those individuals are the ones that are actually paying and being burdened by the current system. It's the people that have the least amount of money to afford to pay it, and we're trying to help those people with the least amount of money so they're not being overburdened. So maybe, Marie, if you could speak to that, it would give a little bit of clarity to the public that are watching and what the reduction would do.
CFO Walsh.
So if we did away with the cap tomorrow and we decided as a council that we were going to be revenue neutral, we could lower our tax rate by 20%. And when we run those numbers, there is about half, and it's around 21,000 and 22,000. Half would pay less and half would pay more. But it seems to be that the lower assessed homes, and that doesn't necessarily equate to lower income, but generally it does, most of the people that are paying less would be the lower assessed homes, is what we found in our data. Now that may be not the same in other municipalities, but in CBRM, that seems to be the case.
Councillor Doncaster, on your second opportunity.
Yes, I thought we were going to vote on the motion. When I get my assessment in the mail, who determines what my cap would be? Is that come out of your office, or how do you determine that?
It's based on a formula, CPI. That's basically what it is.
Now, you just gave 2 examples of 2 almost identical homes, $85,000, and they both have different caps, you know.
Yep.
There seems like the formula's not working.
No, a lot of things can happen. Am I supposed to answer?
you know.
He's asking a
people
technical
listening to this,
question,
huh?
so yes, clarification.
Well, why can't you straighten the formula out so it'll be equal across the board?
That's why we're having an emotion, debate on the motion. Maybe Kathy can respond following the vote on the motion in terms of any of the technical questions, but on the motion.
Somebody with a permanent home and having a summer place like out in the Mire or Bredor Lakes, are they capped also?
Yes.
They are. Another example, if I had a home out in the country and bought another piece of property close by and built maybe a stable or something of that nature, could that be capped?
In the first year you built it? No.
Yeah, but after that, yeah,
After
okay.
that, yeah.
Okay, I think my questions are answered. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other discussion on the motion? Question's been called. Council, please proceed to vote. And motion is carried. Thank you. On the motion, and we will be following up with the province to provide notification of the outcome of that motion. Kathy, if there's anything else in terms of the discussion or comment that you've heard around the table, please feel free to respond at this time.
Did you want me to go through the recalibration? I'll take 2 minutes and go through that then?
No
Okay.
problem.
So how we did this was we looked at, and the numbers we've crunched is over a 10-year period. So if you look at the first one, and it's an assessed value of $85,000 with a cap reduction of $35,000, so it's got a cap value of $50,000. If you took that over a 10-year period, we recalculated the tax rate. We removed the capped assessment out every year, comes out, the cap piece comes out every year at 10% over 10 years, and redid the tax rate, and we made a concession in that everybody stays in the program. You don't lose it. So this would be based on nobody goes out of the program if the property sells. So in the first year, that property with the large, what we call large cap reduction, the tax impact is $43 more they would be paying. In the small one on the right, same thing, redid the calculation on the tax rate, took the cap value out of the assessment based on a 10% for the next 10 years. They would actually pay less, $22. On the one below where they have no cap, and we did the same calculation again based on the same tax rate, removing the cap value out, be $43 less. And then with the one with the large cap reduction at the higher end, they'd be paying $79 more. So that's based on our numbers with our assumptions over a 10-year period, but with a 10% removal every year until the program ends for 10 years. So that's how our numbers crunch. I mean, we're happy to work with staff here to figure out what Marie and others have done, but that's how we've done it.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions for Kathy at this time? There being none, Kathy, I want to thank you and your colleagues, and I know this is not an easy topic to have to try to explain and, more importantly, to administer. So you have your job to do, and Council will follow up, and hopefully an all-party committee can provide some constructive next steps, and we would welcome the opportunity to participate with that.